At 11:42 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, a single reconnaissance satellite passed over the Korean peninsula, capturing imagery that would fundamentally alter the strategic calculus governing one of the world's most volatile flashpoints. What that satellite revealed about North Korean military positioning along the demilitarized zone would cascade into a series of developments that stripped Pyongyang of leverage it spent 7 decades accumulating. The erosion was not gradual. It was swift, comprehensive, and irreversible. The photographs showed something absent. North Korean artillery pieces that intelligence analysts tracked for months had vanished from forward positions within range of Seoul. Not repositioned, not camouflaged, gone. Within 18 hours of that imagery reaching Washington, 3 developments occurred that transformed the security architecture of Northeast Asia. South Korea announced the deployment of advanced counter-battery radar systems capable of detecting and tracking every artillery piece north of the DMZ in real time. The United States confirmed deployment of 2 Iron Dome batteries specifically configured to defend metropolitan Seoul from the exact type of artillery bombardment North Korea threatened for decades. Japan publicly declared it would intercept any North Korean missile transiting Japanese airspace regardless of stated destination. The red line Kim Jong-un believed protected his regime disappeared. The threat Pyongyang wielded as its primary deterrent against regime change operations, against preemptive strikes, against economic isolation campaigns that could topple the government. That threat became neutralized by technology North Korea cannot match, cannot counter, and cannot evade. What happened next reveals not just a shift in military balance, but a fundamental transformation in the power dynamics governing the Korean peninsula, dynamics that determine whether 25 million people in Seoul live under the constant threat of annihilation or whether that threat finally ends. If you are watching developments on the Korean peninsula, if you are trying to understand what North Korea's next move will be and whether the Kim regime can survive what just occurred, you cannot afford to miss what comes next. Subscribe to Dr. Elena Harris right now and turn on notifications because this situation is evolving faster than any news cycle can track, and you need to be here the moment we publish our next analysis. The artillery threat represented more than military capability. It was the cornerstone of North Korean strategic doctrine, the foundation upon which Kim Jong-un built his entire negotiating position with the United States, South Korea, and the international community. 11,000 artillery pieces positioned within range of Seoul. That number appeared in every threat assessment, every war game scenario, every diplomatic negotiation over the past 30 years. Pyongyang possessed the capability to rain 20,000 shells per hour onto the South Korean capital, hitting neighborhoods where 10 million people live and work within 35 minutes of any decision to open fire. The United States military calculated that a full-scale North Korean artillery barrage would kill upward of 100,000 civilians in the first 24 hours of conflict. Economic damage projections exceeded $1.2 trillion when accounting for the destruction of South Korea's financial district, technology manufacturing centers, and transportation infrastructure concentrated in the Seoul metropolitan area. That threat was not theoretical. It was immediate, constant, and credible because no defensive system existed capable of stopping that volume of artillery fire. North Korea leveraged that threat into a deterrent so powerful it functioned as the primary protection mechanism for the Kim regime. Every time Washington discussed military options for dealing with Pyongyang's nuclear program, every time Seoul considered unilateral action against North Korean provocations, every time the international community debated tightening sanctions to the point of actual regime pressure, the artillery threat foreclosed those options. The calculus was simple and brutal. Any military action against North Korea guaranteed the deaths of tens of thousands of South Korean civilians before American air power could suppress the artillery threat. No president would authorize that outcome. No South Korean government would survive it. Kim Jong-un understood this dynamic perfectly. The artillery was never meant to win a war against the United States and South Korea. It was meant to prevent that war from occurring in the first place by making the human cost of conflict unacceptable to democratic societies where public opinion constrains military options. Pyongyang spent billions of dollars it could not afford hardening artillery positions, building underground ammunition storage facilities, training crews for rapid-fire missions, and maintaining equipment that would be used once or never used at all. The investment was worth it because the deterrent value exceeded the monetary cost by orders of magnitude. But deterrents only work when the threat they represent remains credible. The moment defense systems can neutralize the threat, the deterrent collapses. That moment arrived this week. The counter-battery radar systems South Korea deployed are not the conventional systems that tracked artillery based on projectile trajectory. These are active, electronically scanned array radars operating in multiple frequency bands simultaneously, capable of detecting muzzle blast signatures within milliseconds of firing. The system can identify, track, and calculate firing coordinates for 180 separate artillery pieces simultaneously. The data feeds directly into targeting systems for M270 multiple launch rocket system batteries positioned to strike North Korean artillery the moment they reveal their positions by firing. Every North Korean artillery piece that fires at Seoul will be destroyed within 90 seconds of revealing its location. That is not an assessment. That is the published capability specification of the systems now operational along the DMZ. 90 seconds from muzzle blast to precision strike. The math is unforgiving. If North Korea fires 11,000 artillery pieces at Seoul, South Korea can identify and target every firing position before the second salvo leaves the tubes. The Iron Dome batteries changed the calculus further. The system demonstrated 90% interception rates against rocket artillery during combat operations in Israel. The batteries deployed around Seoul are specifically configured for the artillery threat profile North Korea presents, with intercept algorithms tuned for the trajectory and speed characteristics of North Korean 122 mm and 115 mm artillery rounds. Two batteries cannot stop 20,000 shells per hour, but they can stop the initial barrage that would hit before counter-battery fire destroys the North Korean artillery. The combination of intercept capability and rapid counter-battery destruction transforms the artillery threat from a guaranteed massacre into a manageable military problem. Casualties would still occur. Damage would still be extensive. But the apocalyptic scenario that made military action unthinkable becomes survivable. That change in survivability changes everything about the strategic calculation. Kim Jong-un recognized this immediately. The withdrawal of forward artillery from positions within range of Seoul was not a military redeployment. It was an acknowledgement that those positions had become suicide positions for the crews manning them. The artillery could fire one salvo before being annihilated by counter-battery strikes. The second salvo would never leave the tubes. The strategic value of that single salvo against an Iron Dome defense network was insufficient to justify the loss of the artillery force. The withdrawal created a different problem. Artillery pulled back beyond the range, where counter-battery radar and Iron Dome systems could engage them also moved beyond the range where they could hit Seoul. North Korea faced an impossible choice. Keep artillery forward where it could threaten Seoul, but where it would be instantly destroyed, or pull artillery back where it survives, but cannot accomplish its deterrent mission. Pyongyang chose survival of the artillery force over maintenance of the deterrent. That choice was rational from a military preservation standpoint, but catastrophic from a strategic deterrent standpoint. The moment Kim Jong-un withdrew the artillery, he signaled to Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo that the threat was no longer credible. Here is where it gets truly extraordinary. The artillery withdrawal was not the end of North Korean strategic losses this week. It was the beginning. Within 36 hours of the artillery withdrawal, Japan made an announcement that fundamentally altered the security architecture of Northeast Asia. Tokyo declared it would intercept any North Korean missile transiting Japanese airspace, regardless of stated destination, regardless of trajectory calculations suggesting the missile would land in international waters. Regardless of North Korean claims, the launch represented a satellite deployment rather than weapons testing. The policy shift was absolute and unambiguous. Any North Korean missile entering Japanese airspace would be destroyed. Japan possessed the technical capability to enforce that policy. 6 Aegis destroyers equipped with SM-3 Block 2IA interceptors positioned in the Sea of Japan and the Korean Strait could engage ballistic missiles throughout their flight profile, from boost phase through terminal descent. The interceptor success rate in testing exceeded 85%. Multiple interceptors launched against a single target drove the intercept probability above 98%. North Korea's intermediate-range ballistic missile force, the Hwasong-12 missiles that Pyongyang tested over Japan in 2017 to demonstrate strike capability against Guam, became unusable. Any launch trajectory aimed at Guam necessarily transited Japanese airspace. Japan now declared it would destroy those missiles in flight. The Hwasong-12 threat against Guam disappeared. The Hwasong-14 and Hwasong-15 intercontinental ballistic missiles faced similar constraints. Test flights of these systems followed trajectories over Japan to demonstrate range and reentry vehicle performance. Japan's interception policy foreclosed future testing along those trajectories. North Korea could launch missiles on lofted trajectories that remained over North Korean and international waters. But those trajectories provided no useful data about whether the missiles could actually reach the continental United States on minimum energy trajectories that stay low enough to evade mid-course intercept. The testing constraint was not trivial. North Korea needed to demonstrate that its ICBMs could hit targets in the United States with sufficient accuracy and reliability to deter American military action. The regime needed to prove the missiles worked under realistic flight conditions rather than artificial lofted trajectories that bore no resemblance to operational use profiles. Japan's policy made that proof impossible to generate without triggering intercept attempts that would destroy the missiles and expose them as vulnerable to defensive systems. Kim Jong-un's nuclear deterrent, the ultimate regime preservation mechanism, became less credible because the delivery systems for that deterrent could no longer be tested effectively. The nuclear weapons themselves remained. The warhead designs remained. The fissile material remained. But the confidence that those weapons could reach their targets decreased substantially when the missiles carrying them could not be tested along realistic trajectories. The strategic vice tightening around North Korea had a third component. South Korea announced it would deploy intermediate-range ballistic missiles capable of striking every strategic target in North Korea with precision conventional warheads. The Hyunmoo-4 missiles, with ranges exceeding 800 kilometers and payload capacities of 2 tons, could hit North Korean leadership bunkers, command and control facilities, nuclear storage sites, and ICBM launch facilities with accuracy measured in meters rather than kilometers. The deployment was not hypothetical. South Korea possessed over 100 Hyunmoo-4 missiles in operational inventory, with production capacity to build 12 additional missiles per month. The missiles use solid propellant, allowing launch within minutes of receiving fire orders rather than the hours required for liquid-fueled systems. The speed from decision to launch to impact was under 12 minutes for targets in northern North Korea. 12 minutes was insufficient time for Kim Jong-un to evacuate Pyongyang. Insufficient time to scramble to deep underground bunkers. Insufficient time to disperse leadership to survivable alternate command posts. A decapitation strike targeting North Korean leadership became tactically feasible in ways it never was when South Korea lacked precision strike capability with that combination of range, accuracy, and responsiveness. The strategic situation facing Kim Jong-un transformed completely within 72 hours. The artillery threat that protected the regime for decades became neutralized. The ballistic missile force that provided extended deterrence against American intervention became untestable and therefore less credible. The vulnerability of leadership to precision decapitation strikes increased dramatically. And all of this occurred without a shot being fired, without a single casualty, without overt military action that could be characterized as aggression by Washington or Seoul. The transformation was technological, strategic, and irreversible. North Korea cannot build countermeasures against the counter-battery systems or the Iron Dome batteries because it lacks the industrial base, the electronic warfare capabilities, and the precision engineering required. It cannot prevent Japan from enforcing its interception policy because it possesses no ability to suppress Japanese air defenses or to overwhelm them with sufficient missile volumes. It cannot harden its leadership facilities against precision strikes because the penetration capabilities of modern bunker-buster munitions exceed any hardening North Korea can achieve with its construction technology and available materials. Pyongyang lost its red lines. The threat that prevented military action against the regime became manageable. The escalation ladder that North Korea controlled for decades shifted decisively in favor of the United States, South Korea, and Japan. The question now becomes what Kim Jong-un does when the deterrents he relied on for regime survival no longer work. The regime's strategic options narrowed dramatically. It can accelerate nuclear weapons production to compensate for reduced delivery system credibility, but additional warheads without testable delivery systems provide little additional deterrence. It can pursue submarine-launched ballistic missile capabilities that bypass Japanese interception, but North Korea's submarine force is small, noisy, and highly vulnerable to anti-submarine warfare assets the United States deploys throughout the region. The regime can attempt diplomatic engagement, seeking sanctions relief and security guarantees in exchange for denuclearization commitments. But that path requires trust that Kim Jong-un destroyed through repeated violations of previous agreements. The regime can pursue Chinese security guarantees that would make attacking North Korea equivalent to attacking China, but Beijing demonstrated repeatedly that it will not risk confrontation with the United States over North Korean provocations. Or the regime can recognize that its strategic position deteriorated to the point where only escalation can restore deterrence, leading to provocations designed to demonstrate capability and resolve, even as those provocations risk triggering the exact military response Pyongyang seeks to deter. The internal dynamics within North Korea compound the external strategic pressure. The Korean People's Army generals who built careers around the artillery threat and the ballistic missile program just watched their primary missions become obsolete. The Workers' Party officials who justified resource allocation to military programs based on their deterrent value must now explain why those programs failed to maintain deterrence. Kim Jong-un himself must project strength and resolve to domestic audiences even as the international strategic environment shifted decisively against North Korean interests. The combination creates enormous pressure for the regime to do something visible, something dramatic, something that demonstrates North Korea remains dangerous and relevant despite the technological neutralization of its primary deterrents. That pressure for demonstration could manifest as another nuclear test, as renewed provocations along the DMZ, as aggressive rhetoric threatening specific military action, or as actual limited military strikes designed to signal resolve without triggering full-scale conflict. The danger is miscalculation. Kim Jong-un may believe that limited provocations will demonstrate strength without crossing thresholds that trigger American military response. But the threshold for response shifted when the artillery threat was neutralized. Actions that previously would have been deterred by fear of Seoul being destroyed may now be met with precision strikes against North Korean targets because the cost of escalation decreased. The possibility of accidental war, of crisis escalation, driven by mutual misperception of intentions and red lines, increased substantially precisely because the old rules governing the security relationship on the Korean peninsula no longer apply. Neither side fully understands where the new red lines sit. The transition period between old deterrence relationships and new ones is historically the most dangerous phase of security transitions. The next 14 days will be critical for determining whether this transition proceeds peacefully or whether North Korea attempts to restore deterrence through provocation that triggers the conflict it seeks to prevent. The strategic pressure on Kim Jong-un to demonstrate strength will peak during this window as North Korean military and party officials absorb the implications of the artillery withdrawal and the Japanese interception policy. Watch for 3 indicators of regime decision-making. First, whether North Korea attempts another ICBM test that violates Japanese airspace to test Japan's willingness to follow through on intercept threats. Second, whether Pyongyang conducts a 7th nuclear test to demonstrate enhanced warhead capabilities that could offset reduced delivery system credibility. Third, whether North Korean rhetoric shifts from general threats to specific ultimatums with explicit timelines, suggesting the regime is preparing domestic audiences for military action. Any of those indicators would signal the regime chose escalation over acceptance of its diminished strategic position. The absence of those indicators would suggest Kim Jong-un recognized that the technological and strategic environment shifted beyond his ability to reverse it through military action alone. But here's what makes this situation particularly volatile. The technological systems that neutralize North Korea's deterrence are themselves vulnerable to technological countermeasures that other adversaries possess. China and Russia observed the neutralization of North Korean artillery and ballistic missile threats through advanced radar systems, interceptor networks, and precision strike capabilities. Both nations now understand that similar systems could threaten their own deterrent forces in future conflicts. The strategic lesson from North Korea's predicament is that technological advantage in defense can eliminate offensive deterrence that nations spent decades building. That lesson creates incentives for China and Russia to accelerate development of countermeasures against the exact systems that just neutralized North Korea's threats. Hypersonic glide vehicles that evade radar tracking and interceptor engagement. Electronic warfare systems that blind or spoof counter-battery radars. Autonomous underwater vehicles that bypass missile defense networks. The technological competition extends beyond the Korean peninsula. What happened this week in Korea previews what may happen in other theaters where nations rely on offensive threats to deter adversaries from military action against them. Iran's ballistic missile arsenal faces similar vulnerabilities to advanced defense systems. Russia's tactical nuclear weapons become less credible if NATO deploys layered defense networks that can intercept them. China's anti-ship ballistic missiles lose deterrent value if the United States fields directed energy weapons that can destroy them in flight. The erosion of North Korean deterrence is not an isolated event. It is a data point in a larger technological transition where defense capabilities are advancing faster than offensive capabilities, shifting strategic stability in ways that make some nations more secure and others more vulnerable. North Korea finds itself on the vulnerable side of that transition. The fundamental question is whether Kim Jong-un adapts to the new strategic reality or attempts to reverse it through escalation. Adaptation means accepting that North Korea's military power no longer provides the regime protection it once did, and seeking alternative security arrangements through diplomacy, economic integration, or great power guarantees. Escalation means attempting to restore deterrence through provocations that demonstrate capability and resolve despite technological disadvantages. The regime's track record suggests escalation is more likely than adaptation. Kim Jong-un spent his entire leadership tenure building the nuclear and ballistic missile programs as the ultimate guarantor of regime survival. Accepting that those programs failed to provide enduring security would require acknowledging that the strategic direction he set for North Korea over the past decade was fundamentally flawed. Authoritarian leaders rarely make such acknowledgments. Instead, the regime will likely pursue actions designed to demonstrate that North Korea remains dangerous, despite the technological shifts that neutralized its traditional deterrence. Those actions carry risks that previous North Korean provocations did not, because the old rules preventing escalation no longer constrain either side. What happens next depends on whether Kim Jong-un recognizes that risk before he crosses red lines that no longer exist where he believes they do. The clock is running. The strategic pressure on North Korea will not decrease. The technological advantages that neutralize the artillery and ballistic missile threats will not erode. The policy commitments from Japan, South Korea, and the United States will not be reversed. Kim Jong-un must decide within days whether he accepts the new strategic reality or attempts to change it through action that could trigger the exact outcome he spent decades trying to prevent. The decision will determine whether the Korean Peninsula transitions peacefully to a new security architecture or whether the transition occurs through conflict that could draw in great powers and produce casualties measured in hundreds of thousands. The stakes could not be higher, the time frame for decision could not be shorter. And the world is watching to see whether North Korea's leadership understands that their red lines disappeared and their leverage is gone.